through the practice of water reuse. This includes repurposing stormwater, wastewater, and gray water for uses such as on golf courses and landscaping, cooling towers, industrial needs, and more. Oahu has repurposed wastewater since August 2000 with the opening of the Honouliuli water recycled facility used for irrigation, agriculture, and industrial needs across the Ewa Plain, serving millions of gallons of potable water every day. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our esteemed panel of experts on this topic. It's a very important growing topic. First off, we have with us Ernest Lau, who is the manager and chief engineer at the Board of Water Supply. I'm sure he's very familiar to a lot of people, especially in the last couple of years with everything that's been happening. Roger Babcock, who is the director of the city's Department of Environmental Services. Thanks for being with us, Roger. Christin Reynolds, who is the director at One World, One Water. Thanks, Christin. Elson Gushiken, who is the vice president of ITC Water Management. So we have a good mixed panel of folks. Hi, Elson, thanks for being with us. So yeah, it's a good panel of both city officials who help handle and manage our water resources and experts who are working in the sphere of trying to facilitate some of these projects to create more sustainable and efficient uses of our water. So I guess really just to kick off, maybe a question to start with for Ernie. Separately, ahead of this panel, Kevin Kodama, who does a lot of our rainfall outlook for NOAA, gave his most recent report just earlier this morning on what to expect. And Kevin is telling us that we're looking at a highly unusual situation of a third consecutive year of La Nina conditions. A lot of the islands have been dealing with drought conditions. We've seen the effects of that, right? Not just what we're dealing with on Oahu, but if you go over in Maui County and the Big Island with drought and wildfire and situations with the axis deer, and he's saying we're gonna, these situations are gonna continue to persist going into the wet season. Similar, and at the same time, we have everything that we've been dealing with the Red Hill crisis, right? So there's just this confluence of challenges and obstacles, right, in terms of our water use. So maybe Ernie, if you can update us on how much of the need to conserve water is really growing here on Oahu, and the second part to that question, how much recycling or reusing water can play a role in what seems to be that growing need for conservation.
Thank you, Marcel, and aloha, everybody. It's like you take a moment in history that you can look back to, and you can think about what happened last year in November, late November, with seeing folks drinking fuel-contaminated water, and then realizing its impact on our water resources and the importance of conservation. I think it's just highlighted right now for all of us the importance of precious fresh water for our community. And water conservation will continue to play an important role in that. The opportunities for reuse is definitely there. It's been around since early 2000 on Oahu, and there are opportunities to expand that. And we want to do that because wastewater, stormwater, that's another form of water, and we should consider that. And it's going to be an important part of our future as we start to reach the limits of our groundwater resources on the island.
Great. Maybe this is a question for either Roger or Ernie, however you guys want to come at this, but if you can tell us a little more about what's already in place in terms of reusing and recycling water and particularly at Honouliuli.
Yeah, I think it's good for Ernie. Ernie, go ahead with that one.
Actually, it started out as a ENV facility back in the early 2000s. And then Board of Water Supply took it over, and it's basically the Honolulu Recycled Water Facility. It's been around since the early 2000s. Right now, it has a capacity of recycling, reusing about 14 million gallons a day of treated wastewater for the whole Ewa Plain community. Right now, that use is down around 7 or 8 million gallons a day. So there's definitely opportunity to expand that use. We provide R1 water for irrigation of like around 8 golf courses, numerous parks and facilities in that area. We also serve higher quality RO water, reverse osmosis water, so treated wastewater sent through RO membranes to create very pure water that's used for industrial purposes in the Campbell Industrial Park, and actually is used at the Hawaiian Electric's Kahe power plant. So those two together is around about 8.5 million gallons a day. We can expand it in the future. We want to expand it in the future as Roger converts more of Honolulu to secondary wastewater treatment. That'll give the opportunity for a greater reuse on that in that whole area. Roger.
Yeah, thanks, Ernie. So yeah, currently Board of Water Supply takes all of the suitable water, the secondary effluent, and makes recycled water out of it. And we'll be expanding our secondary treatment level. It's actually almost completed now. It'll be completed early next year, and then we'll be producing all secondary effluent there. And so then there's an opportunity to expand the recycled water facility, either Board of Water Supply or a partnership with ENV. We still have to work through that, but we also, the demand has to increase, right? So right now the demand isn't the same as the available supply, so we'd have to work on that. I wanted to step back because I'm not sure everybody knows the difference between what the recycled water designations are. There's R1, R2, and R3, with R1 being the highest quality of water. It's secondary treated, filtered, and highly disinfected. And so it's called unrestricted reuse recycled water. And then there's R2, which doesn't have the filtration, so it's called restricted use recycled water. And then R3 doesn't have the filtration or the disinfection, and it's a much lower quality, just secondary treated water, and they're very limited, very restricted uses for that type of water. So all the water we're talking about pretty much is all R1 water. And Ernie mentioned RO, which stands for reverse osmosis, but it kind of looks like R0. So it's a higher quality even than R1. And we do use that water also, Ernie, at the H Power Refuse to Energy facility.
Oh, that's right. You did convert to using some of that water too.
Yeah. So, and then maybe, sorry, Marcel, I was going to invite Christin to talk about the Hawaii Freshwater Initiative. You want to mention something about that, Christin?
Sure. Yeah, we have a Freshwater Initiative, which was convened by Hawaii Community Foundation and came together around 2013 and maybe 2015.
Hard to believe, but 9 years
yeah.
now.
We're coming up on we might be coming up on our 10-year here soon, but really recognizing this need for the future of water security. So that Freshwater Initiative set a goal of 100 million gallons a day of additional freshwater supply through conserving water, reusing water, and recharging water back into the ground. So instead of having to build more wells or create more source, looking at ways that you can put efficiencies into the water resource system. So 30 million gallons a day of that goal is attributed to water reuse. That's a statewide goal of additional 30 million gallons a day. And right now, our state reuses about 18 to 19 million gallons a day of water, and it's been somewhat static the past 5 years, a little bit increase here and there, a couple MGD here and there. And I don't want to do Marcel's job for him, but some of the bigger reuse projects have actually come from some work that Elson has been doing on the ground. So maybe I'll pass it to him because there's been some really great
Go for it.
work in ag in reuse. But yeah, if you want to check out Department of Health tracks those water reuse statistics year to year. But one of the bigger bumps, that 1 MGD or more, came from, I think, a single project. Is that a nice lead in, Elson?
Yeah, so, when the Department of Health first convened advisory committees, ad hoc committees to develop the reuse guidelines in 1991, I mean, it took 7 drafts, and it was about the size of a phone book. And we were following basically the California standards for recycled water. We were it was very conservative for sure. In the beginning, we were targeting landscape irrigation, and we reached those milestones. It's been very successful, especially with the Honolulu Board Water Supply and the Honolulu Reclamation Facility. We then decided to, as a water reuse committee, to move forward and try to expand water reuse into agriculture. And it took a number of years, but in 2000, I believe it was 2017, the Schofield, the wastewater treatment facility, was certified as an R1 facility. And what we did was work together with the Kunia farmers in obtaining that recycled water and obtaining the blessing from the Department of Health for using that R1 recycled water for agriculture irrigation. So it ended up being that all of the 2.3 million gallons a day of R1 recycled water from the Schofield wastewater treatment plant is now used to irrigate over 5,500 acres of agriculture in Kunia.
That's great. And there's really actually opportunity to expand our recycled water facility at Honolulu. As more wastewater becomes available, we could take it up to as much as 16 million gallons a day. But we need to get the end users in place. And there's one critical project that we're looking at, and hopefully we'll construct in a few years. It's construction of a new water tank for the recycled water R1 system out in East Kapolei area. And once that tank is built, recycled water, R1 water, will be available 24/7 at pretty constant pressures in the system. And we think that'll help expand the use. Right now, we kind of operate a on-demand pump system with no reservoir storage for the R1 water. Reservoir storage will provide additional capacity and stabilized pressure, so people can use it throughout the day and week.
Okay, if you don't mind, I want to kind of back up because there have been some really interesting things that you guys have thrown out there, and Roger mentioned we need to get we're talking about supply, but we're also talking about the demand for this recycled water, right? And I think Ernie also just alluded to it, if I'm not mistaken, by talking about the end users, right? I think you guys are kind of talking about the same, right? Demand and end users. And whoever wants to weigh in here, maybe Elson or Christin as well. But when we talk about recycled one or whatever those levels are there challenges, are there hurdles in terms of convincing customers, whether that be ag or industrial or whomever, that this water is a good usable source, a good efficient source? What are the challenges there in bringing people online?
Well, let me speak to the issue of agriculture. When the state DLNR was looking at developing its first state water conservation plan, they pulled together an advisory group across the spectrum of businesses and government, from militaries, federal, state, counties, to take a look at how we could, conserve water and preserve our water resources for, potable water use. They identified that the biggest user, especially on Oahu, of municipal water for irrigation purposes, or municipal water was irrigation, and the biggest component of that irrigation usage was agriculture. So it became obvious to everyone that the low-hanging fruit was agriculture use of reclaimed water or recycled water. The challenge was it was a low-hanging fruit for most of the group, but from the farmer's perspective, that fruit was like 50 feet up in the air, because they had not been given the information as far as the quality and the safe use of recycled water. So it was a challenge because most of these farmers were concerned about the label of marketing produce and fruits that have been grown with recycled water. So it took about a year or two, but we were able to stand on what Honolulu Board of Water Supply had done in the whole Kapolei area as far as public education and gaining acceptance of recycled water. So we were able to do that, and it's not as a significant challenge today as it was then. I think the challenge now is how do we get economical recycled water to the end user, such as the farmers. And I think one of the other big blooming projects, and I think that there's a great potential for that to occur, is, and maybe Roger can speak to this, is the central Oahu agricultural lands where the Wahiawa wastewater treatment plant is, now certified as an R1 facility. It's a matter of bringing this R1 high quality water out of the Wahiawa reservoir and onto the agricultural lands up in central Oahu. Roger?
Yeah, thanks, Elson. I know you're involved with this project too. So this is a partnership with the state. So currently, all of the water from Wahiawa wastewater treatment plant is treated to R1 quality. It does go then into Lake Wilson, and then it flows down into the agricultural areas. So it all gets reused. But it's now going to, instead of going through the lake, we're going to be pumping it directly up to some new reservoirs that are being built up in Wahiawa. I believe it's called the Galbraith lands, right, Elson? And that's a whole bunch of new irrigation system going to be put in there, and that's with the ADC, Agriculture Development Corporation, the state. And so that is well underway. There was a question about that in the chat, so I did answer that. But anyway, we're in the final stages of design, and then it'll go to construction. It still will take. It's still going to take a little more time because it's a pretty big construction project, a pumping station, and then some reservoirs and pipelines.
So would that be in the coming years, you think, Roger? How far out are we on that project?
Very soon. I think from the state, from ADC's point of view, we can't get it done fast enough, right? So we just need to get permits and finish the things up. We have the funding and everything. It's just a matter of getting it built. So it's a great partnership. There's a lot of support from the state to make that happen.
And so we're talking about 7 to 8 million gallons daily from Honolulu currently, right? And that is largely serving the Ewa Plain and Kapolei and Kahe and those parts that you guys were talking about previously. So once this Wahiawa project comes online, that would essentially complement and add the amount of recycled water that's being used. Do we have any idea of how much more on top of this 7 or 8 million on the Ewa side?
Yeah, the quantity is 1.3 million gallons a day, average flow. Yeah.
Okay.
Marcel, I saw a question in the chat too about gray water. And a lot of the focus has been like on the Ewa Plain, where we have our recycled water facility, and we have tremendous opportunities there. But we need to look more broadly across the island. And gray water reuse, stormwater capture, rain catchment systems, green infrastructure can all work towards making reuse of water more widely used across the island, not just in the Ewa Plain. So I think there's some really good opportunities. In some of our discussions with some of the developers, because of Red Hill, we've asked them to really look at water conservation measures. And I'm proud to say some of these developers are hearing the message. They're actually seriously looking at on-site reuse within their projects. So that's a real positive step forward. We're not forcing them to do it, but they're interested in doing it.
We're talking about residential projects that are coming online.
These are more residential projects trying to use the water on site instead of sending it into the sewer system to Roger's department.
right?
Yeah, so Marcel, I might be better, it might be more correct to call it commercial. So these are residential commercial developments, high rises and stuff like that. So we've been working with Christin and some others and some developers who are very interested. They have projects pretty much ready to go. We're sort of negotiating and trying to figure out to make the price point work, for them as part of their development. There are incentives and things like that. So gray water, I think we're going to start to see quite a bit of gray water use, I think. And before I let Christin say more about that, I also wanted to tee her up because there's actually a state law, Act 160, I believe, right, Christin? Which
170.
170, sorry, which requires all public buildings to be using recycled water by, is it 2045?
2045.
And that means not just new buildings. That means all buildings. So there's some big retrofits that are going to happen. We're building some buildings right now, and those are plumbed with dual plumbing, like the question asks, and we'll be using recycled water for flushing of toilets and for irrigation. So for all uses that are essentially non-potable uses in our new ENV buildings, one being built right now. So
maybe, and Christin, before you jump in here, I'm sure we've got a lot of subject matter experts out there, but also just some people are kind of generally interested. Can we define what exactly gray water is?
Sure. Yep. Gray water is water from your sinks and showers, not your kitchen sink, because that would have food waste in it. So gray water is basically everything that the next term would be black water. So that's, your toilet and your sink water. So if you want to reuse gray water, it has a little bit less, stuff in it, for lack of a better term. So yeah,
Well
your
put.
sinks and your showers. I don't know the audience here. I could come up with a couple other phrases, but yeah, and gray water reuses it can make a lot of sense, because why do we need to flush our toilet with potable drinking water, right? So why do we need to irrigate our lawns with really high quality drinking water? So looking at ways that we can reuse that gray water is just another way to increase and protect our potable drinking water supplies for that use.
And so that's what when we're talking about, and Roger mentioned the commercial, right? Whether that's just residential commercial, and the state law that's going forward, we're talking about retrofitting and creating new buildings that will incorporate use of that gray water.
Correct. And there are also technologies and the ability to reuse the black water as well. Either are an option. We're right now focused on gray water because people feel better about it. But from a technology perspective, there really isn't much of a difference. You can go black water. So I would encourage us to be courageous there and be brave and
take
try
the bold leap forward
as well. Because that does actually end up keeping your plumbing costs down a little bit, so you don't have to have separate lines and that sort of thing. But there's pros and cons. I won't go down the rabbit hole there.
That might actually be a good point to jump in. Somebody actually specifically asked about this. There's a question. It's saying, since the 2015 versions of the International Building Code, gray water reuse has been allowable by prescriptive design provision. However, the cost for adding a second set of plumbing pipes, it presents a cost challenge. And the question is basically, how can the city and the state incentivize gray water reuse in new construction and renovation projects? Sounds like we're already heading towards it's mandated, but in the meantime, I guess, how can you kind of soften that cushion or incentivize, make this more cost effective for people who are interested?
Yeah, so Marcella, at the Board of Water Supply, we're really being very open on the opportunities for water conservation programs or incentives. So this is something that we can look at to see how to offset some of the costs for or a developer to make that leap to a gray water system for their project, but may not be able to cover all the costs, but how can we encourage them to do that? Because for every drop of water that gray water they use, that's one less drop of pure fresh water they get from the Board of Water Supply from our underground aquifers. So using that water for appropriate uses really makes sense. And it's a good suggestion. We'll take a look at it.
What about, and I'm getting maybe a little far afield, but just homeowners out here say, hey, you know what? I'm interested in making sure the water from my washing machine can be reused on my lawn or something like that. Is there a way for individual homeowners at this point to do something like that, or are there just too many, bureaucratic hurdles, red tape, health concerns, things like that? Where does that idea even fit into this conversation?
So there are, Department of Health has gray water reuse guidelines. And so there's a short, very simple document that some of us worked on. I remember if Elson was on that committee, but anyway, we produced a set of guidelines. It's very simple. You basically just have to have a storage tank, and which would overflow then into the sewer when you weren't using the water. And then it recommends types of plants that it's good for and stuff like that. So that's available to be done now. You don't need a so-called permit per se, but it's a little different. Black water and recycled water is R0, 1, 2, and 3 is highly regulated. Permits are required, safety plans, irrigation plans, and many, many other things, engineering documents to be able to do that kind of reuse. But with gray water, it's very simple. So that is available now. And I did want to mention when we were talking about the requirement for recycled water, I just want to make sure that Act 170 is for government buildings only, public buildings.
Oh,
it's not.
That's an important distinction.
Not for all. Not for all. So there is no mandate or rule for commercial or private development. But the other thing to mention about that, about in-building reuse and what some of the developers are doing, even though it's not mandated, is you can use stormwater. So stormwater would be water collected from your roof, and then that is also offsetting potable water, just like if you were using gray water. So that is a relatively simple way to collect water, and there are some places which do that rainwater catchment out of necessity because they have no other source of water. But that could be done by pretty much by anybody. Ernie has the rain barrel program. Raise your hand.
Rain barrels.
I have one of those, and so you can use that to irrigate the crops in your lawn or whatever you want, and that's a pretty effective, inexpensive way to get into recycled water, and whatever you use from that is water that you didn't use, potable water, and so it's a savings of our precious water. So
yeah, Marcel.
So yeah, that might be a more. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, this just might be the next area of expansion of a water conservation program. Thank you.
People speak to the gray water reuse and dual use in buildings. Actually, the city of Irvine, or a specific Irvine Ranch in that community, has been doing dual piping in their commercial buildings, private buildings, since the early 1990s. So it's not that we're setting new ground here. It's been done and it's continuing to be done.
Yes.
Do we know? Is there a way to give kind of a sense of the lay of the land of how many, whether it's commercial or industrial, how many of these dual pipe systems for gray water? How prevalent is that over here on Oahu?
I think the concentration is really on the west side on the Ewa Plain. That was kind of a requirement to install of the developers to install dual water systems. And if reuse water becomes available, non-potable water, they have to connect to that system and use that water. So there is a lot of dual plumbing already in place in the Ewa Plain beyond that, I don't think there's too much installed in place.
So it's more of a situation of the newer development that
Yeah.
you've seen on the west side versus a lot of the legacy development, homes and buildings that are, 100 years old over on the town side. Is that kind of the distinction there when you talk about dual plumbing and gray water and things like that?
Yeah, it's really more prevalent on the newer homes, newer development in that EVA plane. But I think there's an opportunity where, especially if a developer controls a large project, a large area, to look at doing that, even if it's outside the EVA plane, to see if they can collect the gray water from multiple buildings, treat it centrally, and then distribute it to the irrigation system or other uses in the project. So maybe there's some opportunities there. Like Kaka'ako is, I just kind of look at Kaka'ako as could have been an opportunity for this because of the density and that they could have taken that and treated it centrally and then reused it across the whole area.
Why is it you think that didn't happen with all of the development that we've seen going up over there in Kaka'ako?
I can't explain, and I just think there's still vacant land, so maybe there's still an opportunity to kind of link and create centralized treatments facilities that'll be easier to operate and maintain. And maybe there's still some opportunity. We are talking actively to HCDA. We just, for the Board of Water Supply, created our own commercial stakeholder group because of Red Hill and keeping all the non-residential customers informed about what's happening. We had our first meeting yesterday, and maybe there's opportunities for this type of collaboration.
I think there definitely is, Ernie, and some is already happening. So there's, we've been in discussions with a couple of developers, and one of them appears to be moving forward with 2 high-rise buildings in not Kaka'ako, more in the in town.
Date Street, off of Date Street area, is that the?
Yes, State Street, near Iolani School. So there's a couple
Right.
projects over there, and it looks like those are going to move forward. It pencils out. So the thing, Marcel, is that the state or the city has been reluctant to mandate, to require. When you make requirements on developers, it can affect the bottom line, and there's also a lot of unknowns really about what it's going to cost because they've never done this before, and so that is that's a challenge when you're doing development. There's it's just about economics really. So the projects need to be able, you can only sell it for a certain amount, and they know that amount, and then it's all about what it costs, to build the structure. And if you add in additional things like a recycling water system, because it's not just the pipes are there, of course, they got to have dual pipes, but it's also then the treatment system and where you locate that. You have to have space in the basement, and we've only got so much space for parking and all these other things. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into it. And until they are willing to sort of jump into it, which a couple are, they don't really know, until it's, you do 1 or 2 of them, but it's really, how it's going to work out. Not that it's not a great idea and all that kind of stuff, but that's basically what they're, it's a commercial, and they got to, it's a business, they got to make money, right? So, so there would always be a lot of pushback to trying to mandate, something like this, generally.
Okay.
Yeah, I just
go ahead, Christin.
I was just
sorry. Go
going
ahead.
to add that it's really exciting that we're looking at this now, because as we approach those places where we have to consider if we can grow because of the amount of water, this small additional price to do on-site reuse is no longer even a barrier at all. So it's also, as you look at the time horizon, there's going to become a window where it's a no-brainer. And what it does is it enables you to continue to grow and continue to preserve the resource. And so we're trying to be proactive, and I really appreciate everyone's leadership here in trying it out, kind of anticipating that we're getting really close to the point where it's not this nice positive thing that is an option and sustainable, makes us feel good, but it becomes the only way forward. But you got to kind of get some experience doing it, putting it in play, so that when you get to that point, it isn't a no, it's a, hey, look at all these technologies and options we can do. So really trying all these things out now is imperative for them to be a solution when we get to those decision points, which are very much coming.
Yes.
Can we maybe, oh, sorry, go ahead, Elson.
So, and I think we have to take a step back and remember that when we talk about speak to water reuse, right now the trend is looking at using more R1 water, and that's great because we've gained public acceptance on many fronts. But at the same time, it's a multi-pronged strategy, because you're taking a look at water reuse not only for wastewater or gray water, but you're looking at things like stormwater, especially with the advent of climate change. We knew from years ago that the trade winds were going to diminish and the regular rains are going to diminish, but then we would have frequent heavy storms. And with the frequent heavy storms, we have runoff, and runoff, affects our nearshore waters and the quality of the marine life. So one of the things that, also needs to continue to happen is stormwater capture, storage, and reuse. Part of the challenge there, because when we had finished the reuse guidelines for the Department of Health, we then said, well, what about stormwater capture and reuse? And we cited an example, like what if we could take water from Manoa Stream or from that watershed and use it to irrigate the Alwai Golf Course, which is being irrigated with municipal water. And I had posed a question to the Department of Health, and he said, I can't venture an opinion. I said, why is that? He said, we have no basis to venture an opinion. We have no guidelines, we have no regulations, with regard to stormwater, reuse. So it's something that we have to continue to work on, because that's going to be very important, because that's also not only conserving our near and shore water quality, but also the opportunities to contribute to aquifer recharge.
Yeah, Elson's exactly right too. It's a multi-pronged approach. So for the BWS, we do own some dams in town in the Nuuanu Valley area, some earthen dams and large reservoirs. When I first became the manager in 2012, I saw that as a huge liability, a problem. But we're kind of rethinking that, reshaping our thoughts on that to look at it as, could this be an asset for our community, for our future? So these dams, our Water Resources Division, under the leadership of Barry Usagali, they're doing a study on capturing stormwater behind these large dams that can handle the rainfall events, and then using that water and treating it and recharging the aquifer directly for eventual potable reuse many miles away at our wells.
Ernie, that's one of those dams that the Nuuanu Dam that came perilously close to overtopping. Would a system that you're talking about right now actually could it be mutually beneficial in that you're using it for other resources, and it's also lowering the risk of flooding or overtopping?
I think there's a mutual benefit. We'll recharge it after a big storm. It'll fill up, the reservoir will fill up, and then we'll lower the water level. But instead of just releasing that water into the stream, we can use it to recharge the aquifer and cycle back between storm and recharge. So I think there's some real good opportunities there, especially for Nuuanu Reservoir number 4. I did kind of make everybody nervous with Nuuanu Reservoir number 1, which was a very small reservoir and came very close to the top of the dam.
Just to go through some of the questions, I've been going through, and it seems like we've been hitting on a lot of what some of the questions are that are coming through. But somebody mentions, are there backup power systems for the distribution of recycled R1 water used for agriculture?
Yes, anything that
Anybody
we
wanna take
do. Yeah, anything that we do and BWS does always has backup power. So we have to remain in operation, whether or not we're getting power from Hawaii Electric Company. So our operations continue uninterrupted during a power outage.
Somebody asked, and we might have hit this, and but I just wanted to cover it just in case. Was it, could we divert runoff entering stormwater drainage systems into gray water usage? Kind of, it sounds like these two different things we've been talking about, but merging them in some way.
I think stormwater, I think it was Elson was alluding to, is there are gray water guidelines. The Department of Health does have gray water guidelines. Stormwater currently doesn't have a lot of guidelines around how you can reuse it. So to some extent, yes, you can. But I think the big issue with stormwater is really storage, because when you have the water from a storm, it's a lot of water. And you want to be able to store that if you're going to then reuse it over the period of days to come, or if you're going to recharge it. So one of the key assets to identify in stormwater reuse would be storage or land area. But Elson, I don't know if you have anything else to follow up on the water quality side of stormwater, because there are some other contaminants that might be in stormwater that you pick up from the road that might be of concern, depending on how you're going to reuse it.
Yeah, there is some concern. You know, on the mainland, there are developments, shopping centers that actually have stormwater storage, you know, beneath the large parking lots. The challenge with that, of course, is that you have the petroleum products that come off of cars and vehicles. And so, you know, that water has to be treated, especially if you're going to be using it for any kind of irrigation, you know, agriculture. The other part of the stormwater reuse challenge was we know that from science, you can characterize the wastewater, the source, but how do you characterize the water, stormwater coming off a particular watershed, whether it's Manoa Valley or some other places? You know, how do you, from the Department of Health perspectives, how do you classify that? And so that's where the challenge becomes, because if you wanted to take that water, say, right as it gets close to the Alawai golf course, there are all kinds of contaminants that have entered that stream source from up above. And so, you know, that's part of the challenge, but that's something that, you know, we have to work on, because it's a water source and it's not being used, and it is going out into the ocean.
Especially if you have opportunities to capture or retain stormwater way mauka in the watershed before urban development. So it's just basically coming off the mountains.
So, you know, Marcel, it can be done. There's a good example at the University of Hawaii at Manoa at the campus center area. It's all pervious pavement and grass. They capture all the stormwater that infiltrates there. They have 2 large underground storage tanks, and that is used for the irrigation system. So the irrigation system taps into those tanks and uses that water. And that's been probably at least 10 years that it's going on. So those things are possible. But they, you know, they cost money, and you know, but it can definitely be done.
There are other, you know, legal challenges, regulatory challenges to that, because right now you have the inter and in-stream flow standards, right? So you have to make sure that the streams flow when they need to flow, and so the question is, you know, how much of that can be diverted, you know, doing any kind of a rain event. What it determines and defines a storm event? How much water? So it's not simply just building a storage reservoir. I mean, there's a lot of engineering and research that goes into that before anything of that nature comes to fruition.
So we're coming close to the end here, but before we do, I was hoping maybe you guys can help us put into, you know, a 30,000 foot level, looking at all of this and all of these reusing water approaches that we've been talking about. But maybe to limit this to Oahu, because I know sometimes we conflate Oahu and the whole state. But maybe just for Oahu, with all we've been dealing with Red Hill, how much we are using, what I think you said, about 7 or 8 million gallons, so several million gallons a day of reused water. How much more should we be, and I think Christin alluded to this, right? Where we have a 30% goal, or 30% of this broader goal would be reused, and we're only at about 15%. So how much more do we have to go to save? How many more millions, I guess, annually do we need to use, or daily, I should say? How many millions of gallons do we need to use? How does that play into, you know, our broader conservation goals, with everything we're facing with Red Hill and other challenges?
I'll just open with the data. So we're at 19 million gallons a day statewide, and we need an additional 30 million gallons a day statewide. I think Oahu would very well play a strong role in maxing out Honolulu capacity, so additional 7 MGD there. It's easy for me to say, right? I don't have responsibility. But if we're just dreaming up numbers, then, you know, a couple more.
You're not paying the bill.
in agriculture, there's some opportunities, low-hanging fruit there, but I'll defer to the ones who actually have to make the decision. But I could realistically see maybe around 10 million gallons a day that might be available for us if we push real hard on. And now that requires also seeking some federal funding and some real commitment from even the ratepayers to these aspects, because it does cost more to do it. But it was 50 years ago this year that the Clean Water Act started, and all that started from activism and community involvement and valuing the water resource. And so this really is the right thing to do. But it isn't an easy thing to do. It takes investment. But I would challenge Oahu for at least 10. You think we can do that?
I think it's probably doable. And for Board of Water Supply, you know, we're about 7 or 8. We can probably take it up to 16 million gallons a day out of Honolulu without too much in more additional investment. The one thing that we need to do, though, is build that water tank for this R1 system. And that's probably going to be at least $20 million with the pipeline, almost 2 miles of 16-inch pipeline, and the 3 million gallon capacity water tank. It'll probably be at least a $20 million project, which we're going to be working on to try to see if we can leverage federal funds from the Clean Water Act SRF program to do that. And as long as the end users are there, the customers for the new development, we might be able to provide, you know, double the capacity at Honolulu.
Well, maybe that's a good place. Roger, did you want to chime in before I start?
Yeah, real quick. So so we work with BWS with Ernie on the Honolulu. There'll be a lot more water available, so there is potential for some big expansion out there. If there's going to be just development or some agriculture, it could be used there. We are converting some of our other plants, some of our small plants. These are small numbers, but like our Laie wastewater treatment plant is only 0.4 MGD, but it's 100% recycled water. It all is used by HPU. There's no other outlet for that water. We'll be converting three of our other small plants to 100% reuse as well. As I mentioned, our Wahiawa plant is 1.3 MGD. That's 100% reuse. And then we'll be looking at, you know, some others too. So, you know, water reuse is important to us. And then, as we mentioned about the in-building reuse for developers, commercial development, we're working on trying to figure out how we can incentivize that. We're in active discussions on that. And then we'll be working with the various other city agencies and meet that mandate for in-building recycling at all government buildings. So all city buildings will have to have that. And that can be a combination of gray water, stormwater, and recycled black water, essentially. So we've got a lot of work to do, but it's exciting. And I think it's essential. Again, it does come down to money. Ernie mentioned one project, just a reservoir. Doesn't sound like too much of a thing, but it's really important to have reservoirs to store the water. And that one project is $20 million. So it adds up quickly. Projects are expensive, pipelines, pumps, reservoirs, all those things. So.
All right. Well, let's see if we can't keep this going, keep the progress going, get those millions more online. But I think you guys have done a great job of outlining the issues and the challenges ahead. We've got to sign off though, but thanks you guys. Mahalo to everyone for joining us for today's discussion on gray water and reuse. Thanks to Ernie Lau from Board of Water Supply, Roger Babcock from ENV, Christin Reynolds from One World, One Water, and Elson Gushiken from ITC Water Management. If you'd like to rewatch or share the discussion, this recording is available at this same link on Crowdcast. And so thanks everyone and take care. Bye.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha.